Welcome to an introduction to AfterSchool KidzLit. I'm Ashley, and my colleague Jolynn and I will be guiding our conversations today. As we get started, we want to share more about who we are as an organization. We represent Center for Collaborative Classroom, and we are a nonprofit, mission-driven organization, and our mission is to develop students and children socially, emotionally, ethically, and academically. And we're so excited to partner with our after-school sites because you all do this work better than anyone. Every day, you work with students to develop them socially and emotionally, and you support their growth academically. And so in this session, we're really excited to help build your knowledge of AfterSchool KidzLit. We want you to know how it works and how engaging it can be. We also hope to support your role as a leader and how you might facilitate AfterSchool KidzLit in your own sites and your own programs. And we hope that you'll be as excited as we are. We want to build your motivation to bring this back to your site so that you can do this work with your own students and your own children. As we get started, we want to pause and give you a moment to gather any materials necessary that you'll need to engage in our activities today. And so you'll need your AfterSchool KidzLit helpful handouts. You'll also need access to a leader's guide. The one we have provided for you is Meet Denitra Brown. You also want to look at your Quick Tips Plus guide. That's the little blue handbook that you were given in your package, as well as access to KidzLit books. Jolynn and I will also share that there are other times and opportunities that you might engage in the activities if you don't have access to all these materials just yet. So if you don't have access to your books, no worries, you can still engage in this session. As we get started, we want to take a few minutes to get to know one another better. This is an activity called Story of My Name that we chose to facilitate with you all as adults because it's one that you could replicate with your children when you get back to your sites. This is an activity that comes from one of the texts we use in KidzLit called Chrysanthemum. It's by Kevin Henges. And in this story, if you're unfamiliar, Chrysanthemum is a little mouse who loves her name. The story begins by her talking about how much she loves the way it looks, loves the way it sounds. She loves writing it, so you'll see her writing it on the walls and in the sand and on paper. She absolutely loves her name. And then she goes to school. And when she goes to school, she's ridiculed and she's embarrassed that her name is so long. And she's named after a flower which grows in the dirt where worms live. And so she wilts, and you see her completely change when she comes home from school day in and day out. The story turns around for Chrysanthemum in the end when the beloved music teacher shares her name is Delphinium, which is also a very long name, which is also a flower. And so Chrysanthemum blooms as she begins to love her name again. And this is a story that students love, that promotes really powerful conversations around friendship and being proud of your name. And so the activity that we'll use both with adults and with children is to get to know the story of our own names. And so we would give you an opportunity to interview your colleagues by using some of these questions. You'll consider, what is your name? You might ask, what's the story of your first, middle, or last name? Sometimes those are hard to think about. And so some other questions we might ask are, well, who chose your name? Or how was your name chosen? And what do you like to be called? So we would encourage you to pause now. And if you're engaging with a group of colleagues, use this activity to get to know one another better and have this conversation. If you're joining individually, we still encourage you to pause and just capture some notes. Think about the story of your own name so that you might share this with others as you get to know them. Well, now that you've had a chance to reflect and have this conversation if you're with others, we want to share a little bit about our names. And so Jolynn, what might be the story of your name?
Well, I'm drawn, I really appreciate having the different questions. And as I think about my name and I think about the second question, what's the story of your first, middle, or last name? I just think about my middle name. I actually have two middle names and I'm named after both of my grandmothers. So Betty Marie with a hyphen in between and is after my grandmother from my mom's side and also my grandmother on my dad's side. So I think it's pretty special and haven't really thought about it a lot. And then when I get this chance to engage in this activity, I think it's a pretty special way to share. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, Jolynn. If we have time, I'd love to hear more about your relationship with your grandmothers and why that's so special to you that you get to carry their names. as I think about my own name, this is a hard question. I thought, well, I don't really know the story of my name, but I appreciate the last question. What do you like to be called? Because my maiden name is Wilder. And so all throughout high school and college, that's what I was known as, Wilder. And actually, I am the youngest of three. And so people would sometimes call me the wildest. And I grew to be really fond of that name. And so it was hard for me to say goodbye to that name when I got married. And I appreciate the time to think about the story of my name and sharing that with others. So thank you for asking. Thank you for listening. I want to share that in this activity with children, we would give them an opportunity to get to know more than just their partner. So once they learn the story of their partner's name and share their own, we would ask them to find another partnership so that there's a group of four, and give them the chance to introduce one another, to build relationships, to practice their conversational skills, and to share what they learned. And so this is an activity we would encourage you to use back at your own sites. One thing that is really clear in our work is that at the heart of KidzLit are good stories. You're going to see 180 texts that are grounded in good stories that promote conversation, that we help to think about some really important themes in children's lives. But what we know is that some of our most powerful stories are the ones of our children. And so I so appreciate this activity as we use the story we read to think about the stories of the children in front of us and to make their work and their lives visible to others. So Jolene, as we wrap up the conversation around the story of our names, I'm wondering if you might get us started as we think about our own literacy experiences and how that will impact our work with KidzLit.
Absolutely. So we'd like for you to just reflect a little bit, and we want you to consider, what was your experience with literacy, both reading and writing, as a child like? We also want you to think about, what do children need in order to build strong literacy skills? And so we're going to ask you just to pause and either reflect by jotting down some thoughts individually, or in engaging in a discussion around these two questions with others that you're working with. And so Ashley, as we come back together, I'm curious to know, as you reflect on these questions, what really came out for you as you considered your experience as a child around literacy?
This was an interesting question for me because I didn't immediately have an answer. I thought about some of my earliest experiences or memories of reading are being a young child crawling up on my mother's lap as she read to me. And I so appreciated her reading those stories to me because it felt really hard to read them on my own. And I mentioned I was a young child, but I even remember asking her to read aloud to me in middle school as I had to read chapter books. They just became too hard for me, and it was just much easier for me to listen to her read aloud. I do remember in classrooms being afraid to be called on. We did some round robin reading where every student read a sentence or a paragraph and went around the room, and I was always afraid that I would mess up a word and be embarrassed. How about you, Jolene? What were some of your memories?
Yeah, so hearing your memory actually sparked some things for me too, and thinking about similar experiences in the classroom with kind of looking ahead to see when it might be my turn to read, and having kind of that anxiety of being the next person to read aloud. But I do also think about more of like middle school years to later elementary school, where I just started really connecting around chapter book series and just wanting to finish one of the books and then move into the next book within the series. And so I think about a lot about even that second question, what kind of skills, what experiences do we need in order to build those strong literacy skills? And I think about my engagement in those books and my motivation to want to continue the series. Really kind of spoke to both about my experience and also about building those strong literacy skills. What else might you add around building strong literacy skills?
Yeah, well, I just think this is such an important connection for us to make as we think about coming alongside of our children and helping them develop as readers. It's helpful for me to think about my own experience so I can better sympathize and empathize with what they might be grappling with what might be hard for them. But I do know that in order for children to be strong readers, they have to read a lot. And in order for them to read a lot, Jolene, they have to want to read. So thinking about the motivation that you had in middle school is going to be something we want to build in our own children. They have to read a lot, they have to want to read. And so how can we create that love of reading so that we can really focus on the skills they need to be proficient and strong readers?
So some of you probably talked about these as you reflected and engaged in some discussions. But in addition, we wanted to share why literacy is important. And we know that it's so important because it allows us to communicate in all aspects of our life. It's also really linked to the success we have in school, outside of school, and relationships, and also in college and career. A couple of really thought-provoking facts here is that students who don't read proficiently by 3rd or 4th grade are 4 times likelier to drop out of school. And so really thinking about the importance of literacy for all. In addition to that, we know that there's a close relationship between illiteracy and crime, and nearly 80% of juveniles that are facing trial are actually functionally illiterate. And so as we think about these aspects, it continues to think back to our experiences and how we really want to provide some really rich experiences for our students. What would you add, Ashley?
Yeah, those are just really profound statements, statistics, Jolene. For me, it just creates a sense of urgency for how important our work is, both in school and out of school. And I'm particularly encouraged by the work out of school because I think our after-school leaders are really positioned to best support our students socially, emotionally, and academically in ways that look different from in school, and sometimes ways that are not successful in school. Our out-of-school leaders have a really great opportunity to develop really strong citizens who are socially skilled as well as academically skilled. And I look forward to continue this conversation to think about how KidzLit might support our leaders in this really hard but really important work.
So I want to build on that when you're bringing up the social skills and really connecting that to the importance of literacy skills and really how they go hand in hand. And so when we consider why social skills are so important, we just wanted to highlight some of the core competencies from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And so as we consider the core competencies, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time highlighting some of those aspects. So self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness are the 3 that we'll start with here from the 5 core competencies from CASEL. And so you can see here listed under self-awareness that that's really about students being able to, well, everyone having self-awareness, really being able to identify our emotions, to really recognize our strengths, and to have self-confidence. To highlight a couple here with self-management, that impulse control, I think about, we have lots of opportunities in the after-school setting to engage in really great discussions and learning around that impulse control and stress management, self-discipline and self-motivation, and really around goal setting and those organizational skills. And then moving into social awareness, the importance of having empathy, appreciating diversity, and respecting others. And then moving ahead to take a look at responsible decision-making and relationship skills. So again, thinking about solving problems and reflecting. In addition to that, with relationship skills, how can we engage socially? How can we work with others in a way to have teamwork? And how can we communicate effectively? And so as you shared, our social emotional learning skills are just as important and so connected to the work that we're doing with building our literacy skills. And so we want to give you a moment to just pause and reflect or discuss and think about how do these core competencies connect to the work that you're doing in after school. So Ashley, as we come back together, I'd love to hear, what are some of the thoughts that you have around this connection to the work in after school?
Yeah, thanks, Jolene. I just go back to thinking about our work as a mission-driven organization. We know that social and emotional learning is critical and so important. And we know that the academic is also important, and we can't have one without the other. The head and the heart are in the same body. One doesn't stay in the classroom and the other go to the bathroom. And I think that our after-school leaders are the ones who make this really evident and clear for how we can do this. Our after-school leaders do this work day in and day out. They are the ones who are helping children build relationships. They're the ones who are helping children solve problems and play with others that are older than them or younger than them. I see our after school leaders helping our children with homework and projects and those organizational skills. I see them really helping them calm down, that impulse control, as you mentioned, and even stress management. And so our after school leaders are really leading the charge with this social emotional learning. And so I so appreciate being able to partner with you all through the work of KidzLit, because I think that we can really learn a lot from you all as well.
Wonderful. And so I think it'd be great. Let's go ahead and dig into the components of KidzLit. And as we transition, we just want to spend a moment just thinking about, of all the fourth graders in the US, only 1/3 of them are able to read this page proficiently when we consider the data around proficiency of our students. And so again, when we think about that critical statistic, it's so important for us to have this opportunity to engage in a love of literacy with our students. And so as we take a look here and share with you about the AfterSchool KidzLit enrichment program, just highlighting some of the key features, that AfterSchool KidzLit is really focused on supporting students in developing a love of reading and those stronger literacy skills, really enhancing that sense of community, that belonging, a deeper commitment to shared values, and a belief that sharing books together can be creative, active, and fun. When we talk about books and learn about books and share that learning with others, it can be so engaging for us and for our children and students.
Jolynn, if I could just add to that, when I think about the impact that our after-school leaders have on our children, what I so appreciate is that it's not more school. It is after school, and so they can engage in text in ways that make them feel successful and motivated and engaged when they might not feel that way in school. And so I really appreciate that last one, that belief of sharing books together can be creative, it can be active, and it certainly could be fun for all of our children.
And so you can take a look here and see all of the AfterSchool KidzLit materials. And so they're really designed uniquely for after school. And you can see, as Ashley mentioned earlier, the K-8 curriculum comes with 180 books. In addition to that, every book has a leader's guide. And we'll take you through a leader's guide and really walk you through what all the components are there. But it's really helping us to explore some big ideas within the text and outside of the text as well. And then in addition to that, every leader will have a Quick Tips Plus book, which really provides us with a concise list of some pointers and some additional ideas to use with additional books as well. And so in just a moment, Ashley's going to take us through this 5-part process and the leader's role. And so we just wanted to spend just a moment thinking about each and every one of the books follows this 5-part process. And so we engage in introducing the story to our children. We're reading the story. We have an opportunity to have some really rich discussions about the text. And it's providing all students an opportunity to really connect to the story, and then also some reflection and wrap-up opportunities. So we move through this 5-part process and have lots of flexibility and choice on the activities that we engage in across that 5-part process. And in addition, we just wanted to share some leader facilitation tips. So really that stance of the facilitator as we engage in the KidzLit process with our students. So we really want to provide lots of opportunities for the kids to talk. So really setting up those opportunities with those open-ended questions so that students can engage in the conversation. In addition to that, one of the big strategies is to think about using wait time. So asking a question, having a little bit of opportunity to just have silence so students can really think, and then providing them an opportunity to talk in partnerships as well as the whole group conversation. In addition to that, we want to engage students in expanding the conversation. So oftentimes we have our students that just kind of want to have one response and another response from someone else. But how can we say, tell me more? What makes you think that? What are some ways that we can engage in helping students really develop the conversation? And then also opportunities to debrief and reflect. And so in your leader's guide, you'll have these facilitation tips to support us in having that facilitative stance as we engage in the lessons.
Thank you, Jolene. Now that you've had a chance to get an overview of what KidzLit is and what the 5-part process is, as well as your supports for facilitating the 5-part process, we're going to provide you an experience now where you'll get to think further about how that 5-part process works for each book, as well as what are some facilitation tips that you want to remember when you're facilitating. And so we thought the best way is just to experience it yourself. And so I'm going to lead you in a 5-part process experience with an actual KidzLit text. And so you have the leader's guide for Meet Denitra Brown. I would encourage you to have that accessible, whether you printed it out or whether it's on your computer screen. You want to follow along the 5-part process with us. As you go through the leader's guide, you'll see exactly what you're experiencing and how I plan that, what supports I use to be able to provide the experience for you. We'll start with part 1, the introduce the story. That's the first part of every 5-part process. And I'll just remind you that this process is replicated for every text. So although we're working in one leader's guide today, every leader's guide mirrors the exact design. So you'll know what to expect with any book that you open up. And so our first part, Introduce the Story, I want to share with you is Meet Denitra Brown by Nikki Grimes. And we're going to engage in an introductory activity. You'll see in the leader's guide that there are 3 options. And I'm going to introduce you with one of those options. But know that when you're planning this, there's lots of flexibility. You have the opportunity to pick and choose which activities are best supported for your students. I also want to share that we are engaging in a modified 5-part process where we'll experience parts of each of the 5 parts. This is happening in a short amount of time. If you're engaging in the 5-part process with your students and children at your own sites, this will take place over a couple of days, over a number of sessions. And so there is no rush to go through each part. We might engage in part 1 on Monday and part 2 on Tuesday and Wednesday. And so know that there's lots of flexibility, and that's why there are so many options. I'm going to share with you that our activity is Meet Denitra Brown, and I'd like you to look at the cover of this book and think about what you notice. And I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can see this a little bit better. Meet Denitra Brown by Nikki Grimes. What can you tell about this girl from the cover? What do you wonder about her? And what do you want to know? If we were working with children, we would give them a chance to talk in partners and then have a conversation as a whole group about what can they tell about the girl from the cover and what do they wonder and what do they want to know more about. If you're working with a group of colleagues, we would encourage you to pause now and have this conversation as your children might, so that you can experience what they'll experience when you facilitate lessons like these. If you're working on your own, you might want to pause and just think of your own reflections. What can you tell and what are you wondering? As we continue our introduction to the story, it's also really important that we identify cool words. In every leader's guide, you'll see a section where the cool words are pointed out. The cool words are either words that are new or challenging. They might just be fun to say, or words that are worth remembering. We know that as we consider developing skilled readers, vocabulary is essential. We know that low vocabulary leads to low comprehension, and expanded vocabulary leads to increased comprehension. we have a great opportunity to develop students' vocabulary in after-school settings because we know that children's literature has 50% more varied words and language than even primetime television. And so we encourage you to utilize these cool words to continue to develop students' vocabulary. We're going to be finding some of these words in the text we read today, so keep an eye out for these words. As we transition from part 1 to part 2, we're going to be thinking about reading the story. As we prepare for that, take a moment to read this quote. The single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children. And because of that, the primary format for reading in KidzLit is the adult reading aloud to children. This allows every child, no matter their reading ability, to engage in deep comprehension and powerful discussion of really important language and literature. There is an opportunity for kids to read to one another, and we'll talk about that after this 5-part experience. So if you're following along in the Leader's Guide, we are now moving to part 2, and where we actually read the story. Again, I'll just remind you that we might not engage in part 1 and part 2 in the same day. You might engage in several introduction activities on day 1, and then read the story on day 2. I want to share that as I read this story, I'm not going to read it front to back, although we could. If we were with children, I actually have read this book front to back. It's a series of poems. I've selected a few that you might resonate or that might relate to for our conversations today. And again, I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can see better as I read the story. Meet Denitra Brown by Nikki Grimes. The first poem is called You Oughta Meet. You oughta meet Denitra Brown. You oughta meet Denitra Brown, the most splendiferous girl in town. Splendiferous is a made-up word for wonderful, fantastic, and amazing. You oughta meet Denitra Brown, the most splendiferous girl in town. I oughta know, 'cause she's my friend. She's not afraid to take a dare. If something's hard, she doesn't care. She'll try her best no matter what. She doesn't mind what people say. She always does things her own way. Her spirit's old, my mom once said. I only know I like her best, 'cause she sticks out from all the rest. She's only she, Denitra Brown. Jump rope rhyme. Zuri Jackson, that's my name. Count to 3, it's still the same. Turn the rope and watch me spin. Quick, Denitra, jump on in. Coke Bottle Brown. Dumb old Freddie Watson called my friend Coke Bottle Brown. So what of her bifocals? Bifocals are eyeglasses whose lenses each contain 2 sections, one for reading and one for seeing far away. So what if her bifocals are big and thick and round? Pay him no never mind, Zuri, is what Denitra said. Then hands on hips, she turned away and lifted up her head. Me, Denitra Brown, I've got no time for Freddie's mess. Let him call me silly names, 'cause I could not care less. Can't waste time on some boy who thinks it's funny being mean. Got books to read and hills to climb that Freddie's never seen. Then dumb old Freddie Watson called me toothpick legs and spit. I stared him down and balled my fist and said, okay, that's it. But suddenly, I thought about the words Denitra said. I rolled my eyes and grabbed my books and turned away instead. Purple. Once you've met my friend Denitra, you can spot her miles away. She's the only girl around here who wears purple every day. Whether summer's almost over or spring rains are pouring down, if you see a girl in purple, it must be Denitra Brown. Purple socks and jeans and sneakers, purple ribbons for her hair. purple shirts and slacks and sweaters, even purple underwear. Purple dresses, shorts, and sandals, purple coat, and purple gloves. There's just no mistake about it. Purple is what Denitra loves. Purple is okay, I guess. I have worn it once or twice, but there's nothing wrong with yellow. Red and blue are also nice. So one day I asked Denitra if once in a while for fun, she would wear another color just to surprise everyone. But her mom has told her stories about queens in Timbuktu, and it seems they all wore purple, never green or red or blue. Now she just might be a princess. After all, who's to say? So just in case, she'll dress in purple each and every day. What do you know about Denitra and Zuri so far? As we're reading, we'll occasionally stop and ask children to have some conversations about what they're thinking as they're listening. This is an opportunity where we might have children turn and talk to their partner before we continue reading. If you're engaging with colleagues, you might want to pause and have this conversation to experience what your students might experience, or you might just want to capture some notes to track your thinking as you listen to this story. The secret. Denitra's scared of pigeons. I promised not to tell. Then I opened my big mouth and out the secret fell. I tried to shove it right back in, though it was much too late. I told her I was sorry, but Denitra didn't wait. What kind of friend are you? She yelled before she stomped away. She wouldn't hardly say a word to me the whole next day. She finally forgave me, but not until I swore to never, ever give away a secret anymore. Summertime sharing. Denitra sits hunched on the stoop and pouts. I asked her what there is to pout about. Nothing much, she says to me, but then I see her eyes following the ice cream man. I shove my hand into my pocket and find the change there where I left it. Be right back, I yell, running down the street. Me and my fast feet are there and back in just 2 shakes. Denitra breaks the popsicle in 2 and gives me half. The purple ice trickles down her chin. I start to laugh. Her teeth flash in one humongous grin, telling me she's glad that I'm her friend, without even saying a word. New beginnings. A new girl moved in down the street. I said hello and told her that she smiled like someone I know. I told her that she ought to meet Denitra Brown, the greatest, most splendiferous girl in town. What does this story have you thinking about? If we were with students, we would give them an opportunity to talk first on partners and then as a whole group before we move into part 3, where we have an intentional conversation about the story. After we had a chance to engage in part 1, where we introduced the story, and then part 2, where we read the story aloud, we then move on to part 3, where we talk about the story and have a robust conversation about really important ideas and key themes. We started thinking about what did that story make us think about, and now we want to have a more intentional conversation. So I want to ask you to pause and reflect, or discuss with your colleagues as your students might. Consider these questions. What would you want to be friends with Denitra and Zuri? Why or why not? Why do you think Denitra forgives Zuri for telling her secret? Have you ever forgiven a friend for something? What happened? What was it like hearing a book as a series of poems? What did you like about it? What was challenging? Why do you think the author decided to write it this way? Go ahead and pause and use these questions to spark a conversation with your colleagues, or consider which question has you thinking and jot down your notes as you engage in this experience. After we've had a chance to have a robust conversation, you can see that we're talking about some really important things with friendship and forgiveness. We're considering our literacy skills as we think about understanding poems and how poems might impact the ways we understand stories. We then have an opportunity to connect our own lives to this story. So as we move to part 4, if you're following along in the Leader's Guide, you want to go down to part 4. There are several connection activities. You'll see that there's a jump to it activity, watercolor rhymes, and Coke Bottle Brown. For our purposes today, I want to share a connection activity called watercolor rhymes. And watercolor rhymes, we would have an opportunity to build off of Nikki Grimes' work in Meet Denitra Brown. You Ought to Meet Denitra Brown is a poem that she writes and starts off with. And we give our students, our children, a chance to talk about who they want to write a poem about. It could be a friend, a family member, it could be a pet, it could even be a stuffed animal. But they get to think about who might they want to write about. And then we spend some time supporting them in writing that poem. For our more advanced writers, they might be fine just making up their own poem. For our students who are struggling, you'll see in the Leader's Guide that there's a frame that we can give them where they get to fill in the blanks. Meet blank, I enjoy blank. And so you'll see that they also have 2 sessions. So in the first session, they're just simply writing the poem, writing the rhyme. And then the second session, they're getting to paint a watercolor background or a frame for their poem. And then they get to write that poem on top of it, creating a display of watercolor rhymes they get to share with their friends and create a masterpiece of their thinking. And so I'll share some examples of students who engage in this activity, watercolor rhymes. And so the first one says, meet Harper Grace. She is smart, an inventor, loves to meet friends, and has 2 brothers. The best thing is that she'll always be your great friend. We have a great time together when we play in the yard. I admire Harper because she can make anyone laugh. On the right side is another younger student who engaged in this activity, and I'll interpret that for you. It says, meet Cannon. He is my friend. We play superheroes. Cannon is fun. And so students who get to connect to this story, replicating the work of Nikki Grimes, writing about their own lives, but also using the watercolors to support is a really powerful opportunity for them to think about their own friends, their own connections, but also make their work visible to others. And so they get to learn from their friends, and the room is filled with watercolor paintings with their own words. And so it's such a nice display of their work, and it's motivating. They get to read and write in a really fun way. The last part of the 5-part process is part 5, where we wrap up the story. And so as we wrap up, we want to bring it to a culmination of our conversations, our thinking, our work. And so there are several wrap-up activities as well. If you look in your Leader's Guide, there are 2 I'm highlighting. All the words, which has to do with those cool words that we mentioned previously. There's lots of opportunities to build vocabulary. Even in watercolor rhymes, we could encourage our children to use some of those words, splendiferous or humongous, maybe even Timbuktu in those rhymes. And so all the words is an opportunity to use more of those cool words and sentences. But the activity that I want to highlight for you is favorite rhymes. This is one that children have loved in my experience. And so in favorite rhymes, they go back to the book, Meet Denitra Brown, and we photocopy several of our favorite rhymes, and we place them around the space, around our room. And children get to roam around looking at those rhymes, and they choose their favorite one. So after they've roamed around and selected their favorite favorite rhyme, they're now with a group of students who also like that rhyme. And they get a chance to practice that rhyme. They get to read it in many different ways. And ultimately, they get to perform that rhyme. So they get to act it out. They might do a reading of it. And they can have a lot of fun with that. There's a jump rope rhyme that I've seen students actually have a real jump rope and use that with their own names. And so it's, again, a great way to engage them in reading and having fun with reading, but also practicing their own language and the ways that they read with fluency, using expression and intonation. I want to bring back those cool words just to remind you that those cool words can be incorporated into almost every activity. You noticed how I addressed those when I was reading. When I came across that word splendiferous in that first poem, I simply stopped. I shared with you what that meant, and then I reread. That's such a powerful way, a quick way to help build students' vocabulary without stopping the book. I'm not stopping to give a definition and say, who knows about this? I get to give them context in the story so that they can comprehend and build vocabulary at the same time. Just a little tip, you'll notice that I have Post-it notes all over my book. And I want to share that that's something I do often. I use that leader's guide to think about what are the questions that I'm going to be asking? What are the pages that I might want to stop on? What are the vocabulary words that I need to call out? So I find those cool words and I always put that Post-it note there just so I can quickly give that definition and keep reading. And so I'll really encourage you as you begin to look at your leader's guides, as you begin to plan these lessons, to think about how you can prepare your books so that you can really make this an interactive and engaging opportunity for your students. And so as we bring this modified 5-part process to a close, I want to pass it over to Jolene to lead us in thinking about what we noticed and how we might use this experience to support our own planning.
Thanks, Ashley. So now would be a great time, if you're with others, to just have a discussion around these questions or to jot some thoughts down. What did you notice across the 5 parts that Ashley facilitated with us? What were the literacy skills that students would engage in and use during this 5-part process? And what do you really want to think about and remember as you bring your facilitation back, as you implement KidzLit at your site? And so after you've had a chance to discuss and reflect and jot some of those thoughts down, I just wanted to bring about a couple of things that I really noticed as I engaged in this process alongside you. And so really thinking about when going through and thinking about really first the facilitative stance. And so as Ashley shared and read aloud the text, each of the opportunities where we're stopping and asking questions, we didn't get to see that with a live group of students, but that's an opportunity for us to use that wait time, have the students engage in a turn and talk, then come back together, whole group, to add to the discussion. And as we shared in those facilitation tips, to really think about some probing questions. What made you think that? Or what else can you add to what you shared? And so really engaging in a really thoughtful conversation with the students. I think about the literacy skills across the lesson, that these poems were ones that students could really connect with, even adults can connect with, and connect to our own lives. I jotted some other notes as I was looking and engaging in the lesson, that students were really building their understanding of poetry. And so we shared series of poems with them and really having an opportunity to even experience and learn about and talk about poems. In addition to that, I think that they had a really great opportunity to have lots of fun with this text. So even thinking about to write their own poems and then illustrate those poems and have an opportunity to have the watercolors to even enhance the work that they did. In addition to that, I can't help but think about the amount of fun students have as they have a chance to select a poem, work with partnerships in a group or a group of students, and think of ways that they want to introduce that poem to the rest of the group. So they're reading, they're rereading, they're writing, they're building their fluency, and they're building their love for literacy all along all of these stages of the process.
Jill, if I could add to that, I was thinking about You know, I always think of this is such a fun book to read. I don't often think about the literacy skills, but now that that question is there, I'm thinking, gosh, when they're listening to poems, they have to do some really hard thinking. The author doesn't necessarily tell them why Denitra and Zuri got in a fight or why they forgave one another. So we have to make some inferences. We have to use clues to figure out what is happening. That's a really important comprehension strategy. And I just was thinking about literacy skills as, you know, reading, writing, listening, speaking, vocabulary. That is in every single one of those activities. Even though on the outside it looks like they're just having fun, which is great, it's actually really hard, really important work as readers. So thank you for calling attention to that.
So now that we've had an opportunity to engage in the 5-part process and really reflect on all the learning that takes place and really what our facilitative stance will be as we engage in the five-part process with our own groups of students, we also want to just highlight that there's opportunities for adult reading as well as kids reading across KidzLit experiences. So as you noticed here with Ashley, she did the majority of the reading with the read aloud here, but it's providing the students a shared experience where all students have access to the text, where all students are provided with an opportunity to think and engage in conversation and build their understanding about a text as they're engaging in that conversation. In addition to that, students will have opportunities to read, just as you noticed here with picking a poem, rereading those poems with their partners. And then we also want to consider some opportunities for students to engage in independent reading, some additional partner reading, even buddy reading, as well as some book club opportunities where they might have a shared experience around a similar topic or the same text.
Thanks, Jolene. And I just want to point out that there are supports for you on how you might support kids when kids are reading. So if you flip through those leaders guides, keep an eye out for the kids reading section if you're wanting some support for how you might structure that time.
So we want to bring you back to the materials. And so if you have the materials with you on hand, we want to give another opportunity to engage in just looking at the five-part process in another leader's guide. So what we'd like for you to do is select a leader's guide. And as you select that leader's guide, we want to give you an opportunity to just look through and skim through and think about what activities might you choose to do with your own students? What information are you finding in the guide that's really helpful for you as you get ready to plan your instruction? And then also consider what questions you have as you look through one of the leader's guides. So we'll give you some time just to pause and then explore a leader's guide. And then we'll come back together and we'll share some things that we noticed and the ones that we select as well. So as we come back together, Ashley, might you share what leader's guide you selected and something that you engaged with around the questions that are listed here?
Absolutely. Well, I thought it would be helpful if I just continued talking about the leader's guide that we used together and Meet Denitra Brown. There was one section that I didn't mention that I find extremely helpful in all of the texts that I look at. I always go here first. On page 5 of your leader's guide for Meet Denitra Brown, you'll see a section called Get Ready. And what I so appreciate about that section is that it gives us a nice synopsis of what the book is about. So if you're like me, many of these books will be new and unfamiliar to you, and you may not have time to read all of them before choosing which book you're going to share with your students. And so it gives a what is this book about? It gives you a little synopsis of what the book is, but it also gives you a heads up of things you might want to be thinking about as you choose this story. And then it continues to tell you some big ideas. So when you think about what your students might relate to or what they might be interested in, those big ideas help me think about, you know, this would be a great book if we need to talk about friendship, or this would be a great book if we need to talk about bullying. So I would encourage you to look at that Get Ready section that's before the 5-part process starts, because it gives you a lot of information to help you be more efficient with your planning as you make decisions about what books you'll use and when.
Thank you, Ashley. And I selected the guide for 3 Cheers for Catherine the Great. And one of the sections that I appreciate about all of the leaders' guides, but this one in particular, is the discuss part. So as you shared in your read aloud, you had your little sticky notes, and I think that helps that facilitative conversation. And so in the discuss part of the text, I just so appreciate the questions that are provided, because sometimes in the moment when we're doing a read aloud, we might not know where it's going to be the best part to stop and ask a question for students to really do the thinking and the talking and the interaction around the text. And so I think about how those questions are there. I can get ready and prepare my book ahead of time to really engage in a real thoughtful conversation with the students. So I do appreciate the discuss part.
Yeah, and I want to add to the conversation too, just thinking about the first question you asked, Jolynn, which activities would you choose to do with your kids? If I were doing Meet Denisha Brown with students, I might have chose a different activity. As I think about, after school is not intended to be more school, but they get to engage and learning in a different way. I love the jump rope rhyme activity where they actually get to use Denisha Brown and Zuri's jump rope rhyme, but engage in their own jump rope rhyme with their own names. I saw a modification that they could also play basketball. And so kids get to be active and do things they enjoy, like jump roping and basketball, while they're practicing the literacy skills. So I appreciate, which activities would you choose? You'll get to choose activities that work best for your students and what they'll most enjoy as you think about your goals for them.
Yeah, and that one other thing I wanted to bring forth too is in the introduce part of this leader's guide, it's suggesting to provide an opportunity to hear some music, some waltz music. And I think about my own students and being able to provide that music to get them excited about the text before is another great opportunity. So explaining what a waltz is and then having an opportunity to hear that music to get them excited about the text too.
And so hopefully you've had a chance now to explore a couple of different leaders guides and hear from your colleagues about some of those different activities. And you'll see that every leaders guide is designed the same way. All of these sections are replicated in every single book that we have. And so you'll see that they're chock full of fun and engaging, literacy-rich activities. And so we hope that you'll really enjoy planning for these books through those leaders guides.
So we want to give you an opportunity now to see a lesson in action. And so we will have an opportunity to take a look into a group of students, 4th and 5th grade students in San Francisco. So you'll notice in the lesson that the students it's not the beginning of their experience with KidzLit. So we want you to keep that in mind. And you will see snippets of the students engaging in the introduction, reading, the talking, and wrapping up sections. And as Ashley mentioned earlier in our time together, that you might not do all of these pieces together, but for the purpose of the video, we wanted to highlight some of these pieces for you. And so the leader is engaging in the Bat Boy and his violin with the students. And we just wanted to share with you that this story, if you're not familiar with it, is about a father and his son, and they're really learning to accept each other and their differences. And so as you take a look at the lesson, you'll notice that the leader is a non-credentialed leader. He's following through the leader's guide. And so if you have the Bat Boy and his violin with you, you can definitely take a look at that as well. But what we'd like for you to do as you're watching this video is we want you to think about, what do you notice about the children? And what do you notice about the leader and his stance as a facilitator? We'd like for you to jot those notes down, and so we can use those again after you have a chance to watch the video.
In this book that I'm going to read to you guys today, it's about a boy who loves to play his violin and his dad who really, really loves baseball. And then we're going to find out in this book how a dad's love for baseball really isn't as important as his love for his son and his son's love for his violin playing, his music. But before I read this book, before we get to all those, I'm going to play a couple songs for you guys And I'm gonna invite you guys to close your eyes every time I play a song and think about what that song makes you feel. Just how you see when you close your eyes, what you hear, what you smell. I mean, whatever. If you feel like the song's making you feel like you're running through a forest, you're going crazy, whatever, or just like sleeping, being mellow, whatever. Just use your imagination. Then, when I'm done with the song, we're gonna invite you guys back and we're gonna discuss what you felt through that song, okay? So, when I count to 3, I want you guys to close your eyes and just listen to the music that I play, all right? So, 1, 2. Okay, you could open your eyes now slowly. Okay, so who wants to volunteer to tell me what they felt when they heard that song? I've seen you moving.
Yes.
What were you thinking when you heard that song? What did it make you feel?
I was at a special kind of party with my friends when we got older, like 30s. We went out to like a big party thing, just like us.
So it just made you feel like you were partying, having a good time? Yeah? Anybody else?
It kind of made me feel like I was in a mellow place, and then I was kind of like running through a forest, and then I got tired, and then the mellow music like relaxed me, and I fell asleep.
That's cool. Whoa, Patrick.
Felt like I was flying through the air.
Flying through the air?
Yeah.
That's cool. Let's put our hands down. You know what? Thanks for those comments. Those are really good. That's what I wanted to see, you guys really using your imagination with the music. Did you guys notice something with all that music? What instrument was playing?
Violin.
Violin. And what's the book about?
Violin.
Let's read the book. I sashay my bow across the violin strings, the way a mosquito skims a summer pond. With hardly any mistakes, Tchaikovsky fills the living room of our house on Tyler Road. Is Reginald at it again? He shouts between notes. He sometimes comes home in a bad mood because he's the manager of the Dukes, the worst team in the Negro National League. Well, right now the Dukes could use a bat boy, and I think it'll do Reginald some good to get out of the house. We'll get him in a uniform and everything. I stopped playing. What about my practice? I asked. Don't you remember I have a recital next month in the basement at church? The night before the big game, Papa can't find a hotel in town that will accept the Dukes. We don't exactly cotton to colored sleeping in our beds, one white clerk says. Y'all gonna have to look elsewhere. Thank you kindly just the same, Papa says, tipping his cap. I reckon our bus will just do us fine. Of course I still like your music, Papa sits up in his seat and puts me on his lap. It sure helped us get a lot further than I thought we could without our best players. Shoot, when I shut my big mouth up and listened, I loved what I heard. I love you most of all. Win or lose, Negro Leagues or not, ain't no ball game ever gonna change that. I love you too, Papa. Why do you think Papa's feelings changed from the beginning of the story to the end of the story about Reginald's violin playing?
Because I guess he realized that Reginald liked playing the violin kind of a little better than playing baseball, and then he kind of realized that he can play his violin pretty good.
Yeah, so he started to appreciate it a little bit more. Misha.
He probably noticed him playing the violin while his players were up there, and he noticed that his players was doing better than they were before Reginald was playing the violin at the games.
Like he was helping him, right? And he kind of like even mentioned that. He's like, we went a lot further with you playing the fiddle, even though I didn't have my best players, right? Anybody else? Want to add to that one?
He probably Reginald liked to play his violin because it was better to him. It was better than baseball, and it wasn't really about what his dad wanted. It's like what he wanted, and he was good at it, and he liked it.
Right. And you think that's why he didn't really care about what his dad said, and he just kept on playing anyways, huh? His dad started to see that. Interesting.
Because in the beginning, Dad wasn't really paying attention to him playing the violin, and he was losing the games, and then he started paying attention to him playing, and it made him start to win, and he got happy.
Got happy because his son was there playing the fiddle. All those things you said right there, let's think about what you just said, like how Papa felt, how he treated Reginald, everything. Think about the beginning of the story, how Papa felt about Reginald and his playing violin and his love for baseball and how he really wasn't appreciating his son. Let's give advice to Reginald and to Papa about the relationship and how they could share their differences. So what I'm gonna do is have you turn to the person right next to you, and I'm gonna pass you 2 pieces of sentence strip. One green, one yellow. So yellow is for Reginald. Advice to Reginald, to Papa. Green is for Papa to Reginald, okay? So you guys could discuss with your partner about like what advice you guys would give to Papa.
What are you doing? Oh, Reginald? Debes de estar dando más atención a tu niño con lo que él hace.
When you're done writing your advice, listen up for 1 second. When you're done writing your advice, just go up to the chart that says our advice for Papa. So you guys will put your green slips right there. Yay! Your yellow is over here for Reginald, okay?
It's not more often. I liked it kind of when the dad started more appreciating him, and then he was like kind of apologizing, and then he was saying that, and then they like if they were friends, and then they got back together, started being friends. And, like, they would say, "I love you, Dad," and "I love you, son." And then he started realizing that he should appreciate his son more because he was playing violin. No, he should. Papa should appreciate his son for what he's doing in his life. I know. That's what I said. He started appreciating his own son for what he does, and like his son and him may disagree and get above in their conversation. So he just learned that he has to agree with somebody else for once. I think that Reginald should have still played his violin because he might have maybe. He stopped for a little bit, remember, because he was at that game. And I think he should have kept on going and not stop because he might have messed up or not forget a song that he was. Yeah, but the story mainly told about conflict and how his dad wanted something else that his son didn't. Yeah, like father and son. But he said that if you improve my baseball team, that you could have your rehearsal. And he said if you polish something, the bats or something like that. And it's kind of like if you're improving. Did everybody you see, it's right here, the picture. He even said, if you do something for me, I'll let you have something even better. So, but that was kind of forced. I think he really wanted that.
You guys are doing a really good discussion time, but give you guys 1 more minute to wrap this up, okay?
What is your opinion? I think he likes his violin playing. Oh, that's nice.
I think they would have had a better life if they would have both did. If they would have both did different things and enjoyed what they were doing.
What is your opinion of this? I think my opinion story is he should next time not judge people like his son, because he already thought that his son was playing the whatever, yeah. And then after that, he just started to judge him oh, you should start playing basketball. Yes, sports stuff.
So you guys really did a really good job on these sentence strips and your advice for people. So, Lulu, you want to come up here and read a couple of them?
Our advice for Papa, Mr. Jackson, try not to judge a person that has differences.
That's a really good one. You should really start appreciating your son. It's like, you gotta appreciate people for their differences, you know? You guys talked about appreciating your son, or just not judging a person for their differences, and just really like appreciate what he's doing with his life, right? I heard you guys discussing that over there. Okay, can I get some volunteers to do advice for Reginald? So Papa Patrick, could you come here and read the last two advices? Oh.
Reginald should continue his good work. Tell your dad to appreciate you more.
That's right. So you guys really like discussed appreciation here and just really communicating, right? Good answers, good advice. I'd take this advice if I was Reginald or Papa. Like it a lot. Give you guys yourselves a hand. In this book,
So now that you've had a chance to see the lesson, The Bat Boy and His Violin, we want you to take a moment to just look over your notes. What did you notice as you watched the lesson? What did you see the leader do? What did you see the students do? And also consider, what were the literacy skills that were fostered? And also consider, what about their social and emotional development? And we'll give you some time just to pause, reflect, and engage in some conversations. And as you engage in those conversations, you might even consider what things you might need to modify with your particular group of students that you're engaging with. So Ashley, as we come back together, might you highlight some of the things that you noticed the leader or the students do during that lesson?
Yeah, something that really stood out to me was actually not a part of the lesson. It was a part of the impromptu conversation that students were having. I saw the leader kind of walk over and say, hey, you guys are having a great discussion. Wrap up in about a minute. And I just so appreciated that he let them talk in that way. He had asked them to give their advice, to put it on the chart. And I noticed that as others were finishing up their advice, a group of students, children began to congregate on the stairs, and more kept coming over, joining that conversation. And that was a really rich conversation that they had completely on their own without any adult prompting them. And it just really made me think about the critical thinking those students were doing as they were agreeing and disagreeing and sort of hashing out what their opinion of the story was. I noticed that they were even using the book. I saw them pass the book around and say, no, look here, this is what was happening, remember? And so that's a really important skill from in school, that they have to use evidence from the text to back up their opinion, and they were doing that naturally. I also really appreciated the one little girl who noticed that others were joining but not talking, and so she stopped to say, what is your opinion of the story? She said it twice, what is your opinion of the story? And so I just so appreciated that, you know, that social awareness, that core competency that we're hoping to develop was happening. And I know that it, you know, that wasn't just natural, that she had clearly had a lot of support around how to include others in conversations and how to value others' opinions. I also noticed all the students were demonstrating that self-management. They were anxious to be a part of the conversation, but they held their ideas until the other person was done talking, and then they would add theirs. So it was really interesting to me that all of those social emotional core competencies that we're building happened naturally and organically just because the leader read them a great text that got them talking. And I appreciate the leader for letting them talk. I noticed in the facilitation tips, that's one of the first tips, let the kids talk. You know, he didn't feel the need to really lead that or be the sage on the stage. He let them really do their work. And I think that that was one of the most powerful aspects of that lesson.
So Ashley, as you share some of the highlights that you noticed the leader engage in during that lesson, I'm wondering if you might highlight some of the other ways that KidzLit provides support to the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. And what I love about our KidzLit materials is that they are so supportive of any leader picking up an AfterSchool KidzLit guide and being able to facilitate these robust and powerful conversations and literacy opportunities. I know that I'm a classroom teacher and I loved using these because I didn't always have time to plan on my own. And so this work was done for me. And so I want to spend a little bit of time showing you guys as after school leaders. Oftentimes you're coming from another job or maybe from a course yourself. And so what are the supports you have to be able to lead? And I want to draw your attention to the leader facilitation tips. This is in your handout. It's also in your Quick Tips Plus guide. But this is tips that will support your role to help you promote deeper learning and thinking for the children that you serve. I would encourage you to pause now and take a look at this list and think about what you saw the leader in the video from Bat Boy and Violin doing that you also want to do yourself. Just to give you a little tip, I would encourage you, don't try to do it all at once. You might just pick one tip a week to focus on. Maybe you choose to focus on, I just want to ask open-ended questions. And that's all you focus on is how can I ask really good open-ended questions. And then maybe after you feel comfortable with that, you choose to practice using wait time. Wait time is where you ask a question once and then are silent so that kids can actually talk. And that's a hard skill to learn. So I would encourage you to choose one you want to focus on and really think about how that's supporting your instruction. I also would give you a chance just to pause right now and talk about, if you're with your colleagues, what do you want to focus on and how can you support one another? If you're joining alone, just make a goal for yourself and think about how you might use this leader facilitation tip handout to support you as you plan your own lessons. I do want to give you a chance to have this conversation if you are with others, or just jot some notes. Consider, what successes and challenges as a facilitator might you face? What will be really hard for you? What do you think you'll be really good at? And think about what questions you might have. I would encourage you to capture some notes so you can bring that back to your site director or manager so that they can help you, that you're not in this alone, that you have support in being able to implement KidzLit really well at your site. And as we come back together, I want to share some information with you about these texts. And so Jolynn mentioned that you have 180 texts to choose from, and that for every text, there's that leader's guide to go with it. In your handout, you have a description of the book selection criteria. And so I want to share that these texts were carefully chosen as they related to this criteria. These are the questions that we thought about as we identified which text we want to make available to our after-school KidzLit sites. So we thought, is the story likely to be interesting to kids? Is the text age appropriate for the children? And is the story well written? We also considered, are values being explored rather than preached? Are there conflicts, decisions, and issues for children to consider and talk about? It's really important that diverse populations and settings are represented realistically. We also looked to see if characters, especially people of color, are represented realistically. Are characters of color represented in positions of authority and in decision-making roles? We looked for texts where females as well as males are depicted in leadership roles. We looked for texts where boys as well as girls and children as well as adults resolve conflicts and solve problems. It was also important to us that historical events are depicted accurately and various perspectives are reflected. As you think about this list, you might consider on your handout putting a star by one or two that are most important to you. And you might also be thinking of other criteria that are really important to you that are not reflected here. So if you have another question that you want to use, go ahead and add that to your list. This is another place you might want to pause to have this conversation or to explore these criteria more closely. Jolynn and I want to share an activity that we think will be really helpful for you as you get to know the books in KidzLit. If you have your materials in front of you, or if you have access to your materials, we would encourage you to thumb through the text. Find a book that says, read me. What's a book that looks interesting to you, that you're curious to know more about? And we would encourage you to get comfortable and just read it. As you can see on the screen, if you're with a group, we would encourage you to share and talk about the book with your group. This is a great way for you to get to know more about the books that you have access to without having to read all of them. If you do not have the books in front of you and you are not with a group, this is something we'd encourage you to do when you're back on your site, when you're with your colleagues and you do have access to all of your books. Take a moment to read this quote to yourself. Remember that reading aloud comes naturally to very few people. To do it successfully and with ease, you must practice. And so you heard Jolynn and I mention that the primary format for KidzLit is reading aloud to children. While there are opportunities for children to read independently and with partners, the majority of their opportunities to listen to stories will be with you, reading aloud to them. And want to remind you that reading aloud does not come naturally. And so we encourage you, well, it comes naturally to very few people. So if you're one of them, great job. If you're not, if you're like me, it takes lots of practice and rehearsing. And so we would encourage you, when you select that book, to practice reading it aloud. Do it in front of a mirror so you can practice looking and making eye contact. Read it to your own family or friends, or just read it to yourself. But we would encourage you to think about where you want to make different voices, where you want to slow down to sound sad, or where you want to sound really excited. That doesn't come naturally if you don't read it ahead of time. So we really encourage you to practice reading aloud as you prepare for the books. But you're not alone in that practice. In your handout and also in your support kit, there's a tips for reading aloud. And so you'll see that there are some bullet points here for how you might plan. And the very first one says read the book ahead of time, possibly in front of a mirror. What I appreciate about the mirror is it shows me what I look like. And it shows me what kids see when I'm reading to them. I noticed that when I first practiced this, I was holding the book like this so that I could see. But I noticed the kids couldn't see, and oftentimes I was blocking even my face. And so it wasn't very engaging when I did that. We also encourage you to read all of the stories that you like. If you find those good stories that you like, it'll be more natural for you to make that engaging for students. And so we'd encourage you to check out this tips for reading aloud and use that to practice as you plan and prepare to use KidzLit at your site. I want to bring you back to that Quick Tips Plus guide. We've mentioned it a couple of times throughout our session together today. I want to share that for every text we have, 180 trade books, there is a leader's guide that accompanies that book. The Quick Tips Plus guide is a separate guide that is general. It's a handbook of ideas and insights that are just for you, that apply to any book that you'll read. So you'll see that there are some generic activities for each of the 5 parts in there, as well as just supports and tips for facilitation, reading aloud, even classroom management supports will be in that Quick Tips Plus guide. So we would encourage you, if you have access to it right now, go ahead and pause and thumb through that to mark what places will be most helpful for you. If you don't have access to it yet, this is like that book reading activity. Be on the lookout for this and think about how you might explore this once you have it in your hands. Now, this is a time we want to encourage you to pause and reflect or talk about all of the conversations we've had so far. You've had an opportunity to get an overview of KidzLit, to understand how KidzLit works. You got to experience the 5-part process yourself. You also had a chance to see it in action with real students at a real site. Most recently, we've shared some of the supports you have as a leader. And so now I want you to take some time to really process that and consider, if I'm teaching KidzLit lessons, what do I need to get ready? You might want to think about, how will this fit into your own site? What does your programming look like? Some of you might be meeting with the same students every day. Some of you might be sharing students where you have different students at different times of the day or even on different days. And so you might be thinking about what challenges you might have in teaching KidzLit. And so take some time to peruse the resources, consider what you've learned, and pause to either jot your thinking about these questions or talk with your colleagues that you're with. And as we come back together and wrap up your planning conversations, I want you to do some self-reflecting and consider, what is one takeaway that you have from your conversations? It might be from the conversations you've had with your colleagues. It might be from something Jolene and I shared, or it might just be from your own notes. What is one takeaway you have that you want to bring back to your site? And what specific support do you still need to implement KidzLit? Jot that down for yourself so that you can bring that back to your colleagues, back to your site director, so that you have all the support you need to be successful with KidzLit and really have fun. As we wrap up our conversation, we want to welcome you to our community. We strive to support you and connect with you via social media, as well as on our website. And so we encourage you to get ready. We have an online course that will be available to you at the website you see listed here. To get motivated, you can log on to our collaborativeclassroom.org website and click on After School to read blogs and hear from experiences of others who have used similar materials to what you're using. If you are watching this and you don't have access to KidzLit, you can download samples. And so you can visit collaborativeclassroom.org/samples to find those resources. So Jolene and I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us. And we look forward to hearing some of your stories and connecting with you on social media. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.